Hello.
Our, hello, and hey guys! Guess what? I've been toting this all night, but we have American McGee with us.
Hey guys.
Thank
Everyone
you.
dance now.
I regret anything you learned from our stream. But thank you so much for giving us some time to talk
Yes,
with
thank you.
us.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you guys inviting me on.
Well, let me get the questions up, and we have some video of the gate to show off a little later. It is a very addicting game. Thank you for that.
It really is too.
Yeah, glad you like it. It's been working out pretty well for us as well.
It has a really fun gameplay to it with between the card aspect and the actual action portion, and it doesn't feel real money hungry like a lot of the games that are in that same vein do.
Well, clearly we haven't
Yeah, I
gotten
think that's,
farther in.
I was going to say I think that's a matter of opinion based on how far you get into the game because it's certainly the case that when you first start playing, it's free, but the more aggressive you get in the competitions, the more it can end up costing you. So we try to make it possible for there to be a balance between the free and the non and the paying customers. But it's tough to do once the competition gets going. It's really tough to maintain that balance.
Yeah, I can understand because I've seen a lot of games really kind of cripple under their own community whenever they have a tendency to like sell power in their cash shop, and a lot of games really it drives a lot of real good people out.
Well, but you've got to question, part of why the businesses do that. I mean, the truth is that the
Yeah,
model works, and that it's worked in a number of different ways in lots of different countries around the world. So, I mean, we're taking lessons from, other successful games in this genre, and part of what we're trying to do is simply to stay in business, right? I mean, we are not a free company. I mean, we have salaries to pay people and rent to pay. And so the mechanics are not purely our invention. They're creations that have been tested and proven over time to work not only to make it fun for the people who want to pay, and also hopefully for the people who don't, but also to help us to sustain our business.
right.
So you're still? Did you start up Spicy Horse? That's something that I've heard so many different things about.
Yeah, that was over 8 years ago that I started the company. When it began, I was in Hong Kong with the our art director at the time, a guy named Ken Wong, who was the art director on the Alice Madness Returns game, and several of other titles. And he and I moved up to Shanghai and started up Spicy Horse.
See, I have got to ask: is it weird being in China and having a name like American? Has anyone made any jokes or anything?
No, not at all. Actually, I'd say here compared to other places in the world, the sort of reaction people have to it is a lot more calm. Because Chinese people usually, when they're in elementary or they're starting in high school, they're asked to give themselves English names, and a lot of them choose what we would consider to be really weird names. We've had people in our studio with English names like Catastrophe. One guy's name was Real Alien. One person was Plism. She'd named herself Plism. We had Led Zeppelin. So one of the guys actually named himself after that band. And another guy's name was Speed Shit. So and they're serious about it. And one guy I met, his name he said was Daniel, but then when I actually saw it, how he's spelling it, it was Danielle. So there's yeah, I mean, there's a lot of unusual names going around here, and so people don't really think twice about it.
I'm trying not to laugh because those are people's names that they're absolutely serious about, but some of them are pretty funny.
Well, I'm happy that I can say honestly that I got a chance to work for several years with Led Zeppelin. I think that was very cool.
So what made you want to open the company in China instead of opening it here in America?
Well, I had already left the U.S. by the time this opportunity came up. So maybe the question first would be, why did you leave the U.S.? I went to Hong Kong because I'd had an interest in Asia, the culture, and the business for a long time. And I was offered a job there. I made a game in Hong Kong called Bad Day LA. And that gave me an opportunity to see the mainland of China and to do some work there as well. And at some point, GameTap came along and said, "Hey, we want you to make a game." And I told them that I was in Hong Kong, in China, and that if I was going to make this game, I was going to do it by starting a studio in the mainland, in Shanghai. And they didn't have a problem with that. The reason I wanted to do that was because I could see that there was an opportunity. There were no studios, independent game development studios, in existence in Shanghai at that time. All of the game work being done was either with outsourcers. So those are the companies that produce all the 3D assets that go into all the games you play on your consoles, or with big Chinese publishers like Tencent, Shanda, NetEase. And so there wasn't a lot of choice for the local developers. They didn't have an opportunity to work on original titles for the Western market. And my theory was if we started up a studio with that goal, that we'd be able to attract some really talented people. And that did end up being the case.
So with the Alice games, I know I'm a huge fan of them, but what made you go the way you guys did with the second one, to where you kind of had more of a backstory on Alice and exactly what happened to her? Whereas the first one, it showed a little bit, but it was also kind of vague if it was a real world or not.
I think part of that is, my desire to flesh out the story and the characters a little more, to help people feel like they have a better understanding of who she is as a character and what motivates her. I think the other part of it is just the technology and our capabilities in terms of delivering story and putting sort of cinematic visuals and cinematic experience on screen. It's a lot easier these days to do that than it was when we were making the first Alice game. Back with the first Alice game, the technology we were using was considered very cutting edge in terms of being able to place a camera in a scene and to shoot, a sort of cinematic within the game engine. We were within a few years of that really sort of being invented and becoming normal. So, of course, these days, the engines that we use, like Unreal 3, that's one of the basic tools that you use when building a product with that. So it gives us a much more sort of easier ability to express the story stuff.
And along the same lines of that, what made you decide to make Alice Otherlands into a series of animated shorts instead of a third installment in the game series?
Well, I'd love to make it as a third installment in the game series, but that's EA's decision because they control the game rights. The unusual thing about the Alice IP, the property itself, is that it's split into two pieces. One is the piece that is the game or interactive rights, which is controlled by EA, and the other is what's called the linear rights. So that would be the rights for anything that's presented as video, animation, film, and so there's a film producer, who bought those rights 100% from EA, the linear rights, which means that they don't get to decide what's done with those rights. They sold that option away. And that's why I was able to go and take those rights and propose that a series of animations be done and not have to ask EA's permission to do that. Of course, my hope is that by making the animations and showing the interest in them and maybe laying some groundwork for the Otherlands story, that might also inspire EA to come back and decide they want to make a third game.
Interesting.
Now, I have seen circled around quite a few years now that there's going to actually be a full-on Alice movie.
Yeah, that's something that we're working on here in China now. There's a Chinese action film director, live action. Also, he does live action films, but mainly in sort of the action mystery genre. His name is Shu Ke, and he's taken a really big interest in Alice as a feature film, and so I've been working with him to develop that, and we're working towards putting finance in place and hopefully being able to shoot a feature film here in China, and then have that released worldwide.
I know
What
I'd be
is
really interested in seeing that.
Yeah, me too. But what's it like being a game developer in China, having to adhere to the strict government mandates for all game developments?
Well, you could have a section of in the U.S. who has to adhere to the strict mandates of the ESRB, right? Every country in the world has regulatory committees that enforce standards on almost everything that we do. So the truth is, China is no more regulated or difficult than any other country in the world. But that is a convenient narrative for the Western press and Western government to sell to people, that somehow China is radically different from what they understand, in terms of freedoms. As an American living here, I can tell you that I find this culture to be incredibly free. There's a tremendous lack of license, of regulation, almost to the extent where you feel like it would be good if they had a little bit more, because it can feel a little Wild West, a little dangerous at times. Um, but as a game maker, yeah, the impact has been zero. We've never once had any sort of interaction whatsoever with regulation or with someone trying to suggest that we remove or change content in our game. That is not the case, by the way. In my years in developing in the U.S., I've actually had some interactions with the regulation bodies in the U.S. That have forced us to change content in our games. So I would say that here, again in China, it feels like you're a bit more free to do what you want, because I've never, at least in my experience, I've never had anybody suggest that we change anything.
Now, I know a lot of our fans are looking to get into game design and into just gaming, working in the game industry in general. Is there anything you can kind of give them as tips to help them along?
So the biggest thing that I suggest people do these days is simply to go out and make something. I know a lot of people are going to school, or they're saying they want to study, or they want to get in, or they've got a design, or my feeling is that the tools are out there right now. Unity 3D or Unreal, or there's a dozen sort of off the shelf free 3D engines you can get access to online, and go and build something. I mean, that's absolutely the best way to establish your skills and also to show your skills to someone who might want to hire you. It's also the case that all these publishing platforms are out there, and they're easily accessible. An individual can publish an app to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, with very little effort. And so it seems to me the only thing that's standing in between people saying they want to be a game developer and actually being a game developer, is that they just go out, grab the tools, and begin to work towards doing that.
Sounds like you guys just have to stop being lazy.
It basically is that, from what I've heard. Like, what people will look at's your portfolio, not your degree.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I mean, in my studio, so first of all, the education system in China is such that everybody has a degree, because school is made readily available and it's very cheap. So everyone has a degree. That's not a defining quality about someone, right? But when we hire people, we never care about their degree. It's always about their portfolio and what they're able to show us that they've accomplished. Doesn't matter if they've had a job or not in the past where they've accomplished that stuff. For instance, one of our most prolific and creative concept artists, she has 2 degrees because her parents wanted her to go into a more traditional career. So she's got an electrical engineering degree and a computer science degree. But after she spent 6 years going to college, she told her parents she was going to take a year off to teach herself art because she wanted to be an artist. So she did that. She spent 1 year teaching herself to be an artist. And now she's one of the best artists in our studio, and she doesn't have a degree in art. And prior to us hiring her, she didn't have a portfolio of work that was generated on the job, right? She just came in with this incredible art and said, I want to be an artist. And her portfolio was enough to convince me right then and there that we should hire her.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Now, for people who are looking to try to find voice acting gigs with you guys, let's say with you guys, what is it that you look for? Do you look for people that have the experience, or again, just people that want to try out? I'm asking this as a selfish question.
There's a couple of things we never look for. Voice actors is one of them. Musicians, composers is another one of them. Because there's so many of them out there, it's we're flooded with people saying they want to make music for games, they want to do voice acting for games. So we don't go and sort of look out to the internet or post up that we're trying to find a person to do that, because I think our email servers would be destroyed by all the people who said they wanted to come and do voice acting or music. Instead, we usually work through agencies, and then the agencies will send over packets of sample recordings, and then we can find a voice that we think is appropriate for whatever it is we're doing. Same thing goes with music. Although just to be clear, we're not looking for any voice actors or musicians or anybody at all related to sound. We've got all that stuff covered, so no need
now
to
you've
email.
Broken their hearts. Gaming Writers asked, how is Alice Otherlands going?
So we've got 2 short films in production right now, and one of them is a stop-motion short film that's being produced by a director named Troy Morgan in Los Angeles. The other one is an computer-animated short film that's being directed by a guy here in Shanghai named Ed Goin. And so they're both looking pretty good. I just saw, actually, yesterday, a sort of daily footage from Troy of his stop-motion Wagner animation, and it looks really cool. Actually, what impressed me more was that he's got this like 12-foot tall set that he's constructed with this massive gimbaled system for the camera, where he's shooting the stop motion. I mean, it's really impressive just seeing the size and the scale of the set that he's put together for it. But we expect both of those animations to be done before the end of this year, at which point we'll package them up with other goodies and then start to send them out to the backers, either in physical form or in digital form.
So what is your favorite kind of animation? Stop motion, traditional cartooning, or 3D animation?
I can't say I have a favorite, really. Yeah, I mean, favorites questions are really tough for me because I don't generally pick favorites. If it's food or music or animation or movies, I tend to consume all of it equally, and I have examples of each type that I like a lot. So no real favorites.
So you originally started with id Software. How did it feel to get to make games like Doom 2, Quake 2? A lot of things with 2 in it.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun back in those days. The company was really small. I was the 9th employee, so that was including a receptionist. So we had 8 people working on those games that you mentioned. And it was a very close-knit development environment, especially in the first couple of years. And we worked like crazy. I mean, everybody was working like 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And at that time, of course, I mean, we were working on stuff that was really cutting edge and very popular. So it was a pretty incredible feeling to be there, sort of playing with all those technology toys, getting a tremendous amount of attention and respect from the gaming community. And for me personally, learning a tremendous amount about making games, and the technology and the development practices that go into it.
Which market do you think is more lucrative for console games? America's market or China's market? And the same thing for mobile games.
Well, I think China's got a population of 1.3 billion people. So when it comes to anything being more lucrative, China is always going to win. So long as the product is something that's accepted here. So consoles are not, I think, a fair thing to talk about in terms of US versus China, because consoles are not the sort of normal way people expect to consume games. I think a lot of people know that there's been a ban on Western consoles in China for the last, I think, 12 or 15 years now. That doesn't stop there from being consoles in China. They are here. they're actually quite easy to get your hands on. I could send you a web link, and you could find thousands of them for sale to be delivered next day to your door in China. So it's not really an access thing, but it's a cultural thing. I think much in the same way that you see a lot of people are very resistant to free-to-play games in the U.S., people here in China just don't get why you'd want to strap yourself to this physical box that you have to feed discs in and pay, $60 a pop up front, to determine whether or not that's a game that you really care about, right? So there's a very different psychology and culture. So back to your question, I mean, consoles are always going to do better in the Western market, and I think mobile games, because of the size of the market, the central market here, they're doing incredibly well in China and the rest of Asia as well, because these are people who they weren't given consoles as kids. Their first gaming device was a mobile device, and a lot of them have never interacted with a game or a computer outside of a touchscreen interface. So if you can imagine an entire generation of people being born who've never touched a console controller or even a keyboard, you'll understand that the way that they expect to consume games, and to have them be online, have them be multiplayer and interconnected, have them delivered to their pocket wherever they want to be, and they're used to the idea of in-app purchase and free-to-play mechanics. Obviously, those types of games are going to dominate here.
I mean, I'll be honest, I had no idea that there was like a cultural ban on Western consoles, but that is definitely something interesting to think about whenever you do like marketing and development for certain regions.
Yeah, what's funny is that all of the assets that are in the games that you play on console in the West, a large majority of those are made here in China. So outsourcing is a really big deal for 3D art assets, and so companies like EA, Activision, Ubisoft, they all have massive studios out here that produce the 3D artwork that you're interacting with in your Western console games. And of course, the consoles themselves are also manufactured in China. But yeah, there is a ban on the sale of those at retail in China. So the only way you can get console games in China is on the gray market. Again, it's very, very easy to do. No one is trying to sort of enforce the law. But yeah, it's not a common way to consume games here.
No Soul wants to know what your opinion on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins are. And how do you feel it'll affect the gaming market in the way of economics?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting phenomenon. I'm not educated enough on it to really have a strong opinion. I have friends that are pretty deeply involved in it and who are big advocates for it. But again, like I said, I don't sort of have any real personal interest in it, so I couldn't comment on what it's going to do or not do for games.
We have a question from the Psychodist, wonderful name. With the world saturated mainly with first-person shooters, what genre do you think would be highlighted or make bigger comebacks with the way it is right now?
That's the thing. I mean, my personal opinion about, what genre I'd like to see more of doesn't really hold much sway. There's a reason why first-person shooters are successful and they're dominant is because so many people prefer to play them and buy them. So, I mean, this is just, traditional market forces working to saturate the shelves with the same type of Me Too games that people continue to purchase. For my part, personally, like I don't tend to play those kinds of games, even though that's where I got my start. I much prefer sort of Fallout style, RPG adventure style of games with decent story in them. But those are very expensive games to make. They're risky. The cost when you fail on those types of games is really high. So we just don't see as many of them. But yeah, I mean, if you ask me what I'd like to see, what I'd like to play at home, that would be the kind of thing I'd like to see more of.
Now, you mentioned you like games such as Fallout and things like that. Would you ever want to do a game where a lot of the fairy tale and stuff like characters like that all meet in a world where you can interact with them, build things, make it like a big grand adventure? Something like Beyond the Grim game, just with a bigger environment where it's not just cut up into episodes?
Yeah, absolutely. It was partly what we were trying to propose to do with our Oz Zombie game, and I've also sort of proposed to publishers in the past doing a sort of fairy tale world. I don't know if it'd be right to call it an MMO, but certainly a sort of action adventure set in a larger space. I'd be interested in doing that kind of thing. The question is whether or not we can find the financing and support from a publisher to do that kind of thing.
Do you ever plan on returning to develop on your original Oz title from your time with Ronin Games?
No, I mean, we ran a Kickstarter campaign last year that failed. That was an attempt to revive that concept. And I think that, after all the effort that we put in and the artwork that we presented and the design concepts that we showed, and we weren't able to get the kind of support we were looking for, that just said to me that, we should let it go. That the audience interest in it wasn't sufficient to support the idea of making the game. And I kind of felt like if we can't raise the level of interest early on like that that we need, then that's probably just not a product people are interested in.
And are there any other, either American or European fairy tales that you want to take in the same direction that you took Alice and the Grimm games?
These days I'm not spending a lot of time thinking about new game titles in the fairy tale space. The business right now is very much focused on the one current game, The Gate, and we're kind of waiting to see how that, the success of that title might allow us to build the studio back up again, later this year and start thinking about new titles. But right now, I'm really not thinking about new titles.
Well, let's hope The Gate. It is extremely addicting and fun. So I'm sure it'll bring your studio right back up.
Definitely.
And if you guys haven't checked it out, it is on Facebook and on iPhone as well as Android. I still have not tried the Android version.
I'll put a link to the web browser in the chat.
Now, do you guys have any more questions? Oh, we did have a question earlier. Someone asked if you would ever come back to play games like, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Cards Against Humanity.
Is the question, would I ever play Cards Against Humanity?
Yes.
Like, would you come back
sure.
and play with us on the channel?
Oh, I see. Maybe, depends on schedule, but that is a game that my friends and I play when we get together for dinner parties. So we printed out the stuff online and then played here. It's not. I don't think we've been able to find where you could go and buy the decks in China, but you can print them out. So we've done that.
I can only imagine a lot of the subject material in there would be a bit taboo.
Not really, but a lot of the stuff that like comes when you print out the local editions requires a knowledge of sort of local sitcom or famous characters. I guess there was a little bit of political stuff in there, but I guess not as much as you'd think. But yeah, it kind of throws you for a loop sometimes when you pull a card and it's a reference to a famous Chinese actor that in fact you don't know, and then it kind of, the joke falls flat,
Yeah, I know how that feels. When we play, the name Harry Godo comes up, and I still have no idea who that is.
Yeah.
I think Ember looked it up once, but I still can't remember. But
So Psycho asked, and I'm sorry, do you like to sing?
Do I like to sing? I'm not a big fan of singing, though. We do go out here to KTV, which is like a karaoke bar thing, but it requires a lot of drinking on my part before I start to feel comfortable singing.
Well, he has that in common with you, Nova.
yeah, I don't let these people make me sing anymore.
Does anyone have any more questions? Come on, you can ask. We don't bite. Well, American might. They're all just very happy that you're a Fallout fan. So here's a question: on your downtime, what games do you play?
So honestly, I don't play that many games these days. Minecraft I go back to from time to time, uh, and still can find Minecraft interesting. But yeah, I mean, generally I try to get outside or to do things other than play games. So I spend a lot of time studying Chinese or playing cello. I have a sailboat in Thailand, and I go over and go sailing and spend time out on the water there. Just try to get away from the noise and pollution of Shanghai. But yeah, I find that I think as the older I get, the less time I spend in games, and the more I want to get outside and sort of learn stuff or do stuff in the physical world.
All right, here's a question from CosmoFish888. If you were given the opportunity to interpret a long-running game franchise like Sonic or Mario, would you do it, and what would you do with the characters?
This was one of the things, like when I was at EA, they asked me after Alice to go into their library of old titles and think about sort of putting an American McGee twist on them, right? And they brought up stuff like their motorcycle racing game Road Rash as an example. And I just, it just didn't really appeal to me. The truth is that, when I think about games, it's not always with a dark twist. It's not always with a fairy tale twist. The game designs that we've had come out of Spicy Horse in recent years, you can see a lot of them don't have anything to do with fairy tales, though, like The Gate does have a bit of a dark twist to it. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about taking yet other games that weren't mine, trying to do something with them. But I think people would expect that I would turn them dark, right? That I'd put a knife in Mario's hand and have blood squirting out of all the mushrooms or something. But yeah, it's not something that I've really thought about.
All right, so Gaming Writer asks, do you like anime or animation in general?
Sure, yeah. I mean, again, this is, I had an infatuation with it years ago and did a lot of collecting and a lot of watching of it. But this sort of comes back to, life today. I mean, these days I sort of strive for a more kind of simple existence. And so I don't tend to collect stuff. I don't tend to spend a lot of time in front of the TV or watching movies or TV shows. I've become very selective about that stuff, right? Again, just going back to a desire to want to get outside and do things in the real world as opposed to being in the house playing games or watching stuff. I know that's not probably as much fun or what you guys were expecting, but it's the truth.
Everyone is unique, so
nothing wrong with going out and having some fun.
No, but what did make you decide to go with Mobage as a publisher for the North American release of The Gate on Android instead of the Spicy Horse games like you used for Crazy Fairies?
Well, we just had a sense with The Gate that it was going to be pretty big. We'd shown it to a bunch of publishers doing it during GDC 2 years ago, and DNA/Mobagi, they were the ones who moved the fastest to put a deal in place and also to work to convince us that they were going to be a good publishing partner. So we have self-published our games in the past, but our sense was that with this title we were going to need sort of more professional, dedicated marketing and support services in order to make it work. So we went with those guys, and we've been very happy working with them. They've definitely taught us a lot about how to run this game, the scale of game, the social aspects of it, and beyond that.
All right, Cosmofish asked, the ending of Madness Returns kind of confused me. Is Alice now permanently mad, or what?
Or is this something you have to watch Otherlands to figure out?
Yeah, I mean, I really hate answering questions like this because I think it takes away from the mystery of of the games in general. And I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about lots of different little pieces they might have picked up on while playing the game. So the question of being mad is one that relates back to kind of the one of the general themes of the game, and that is, how does society define madness? And in fact, there's this issue of any person who's seen to be going against the system, to be operating in a way that's not approved of by the general public, could be labeled mad. So I think certainly Alice is mad in the sense that she wants to shake up the world in which we live. When she walks out of the train station, and we see this sort of combination of Wonderland and London, this Lunderland, what she's doing is sort of projecting upon the world outside her hopes and desires for how the world might transform. And any person who's attempted to change the world has risked being called mad. And so I think if you want to look at her in that sense, and you want to think about Alice as a character who's attempting to change the world in which we live, then yeah, she walks out of there quite mad.
Now here's one that I've been wondering about. You put a little Raz from Psychonauts in Alice. Are they connected in any way?
Well, I think you could say that Raz and Alice, both being sort of explorers of the landscapes of the mind, share an affinity, share a connection. But I mean, they've never met. The reason that's in there is simply because I'm a big fan of the games, of the Psychonaut game, and of Double Fine in general.
If you got the chance to work with Double Fine in making a combination of the two, would you do it?
Sure, absolutely. I think that could be fun. I think it had to be something that was a sort of side story adventure. It couldn't, and probably we wouldn't want it to invade upon Alice's sort of real world, right? The one we know from the console games. But like with the Other Lands series, I mean, that gives us an opportunity to explore side avenues, and I could see how somehow combining Alice together with Raz in a sort of side adventure might be fun.
Okay, Psychoist wants to know if you could pick one game that did real poorly in the market, such as Duke Nukem 3D or Aliens Colonel Marines, which one would you choose to do a remake of?
Well, I think this kind of goes back to the previous question about which game would I put a twist on. I don't really kind of think about going and messing with other people's work like that. There's a game that I did called Bad Day LA, which was very poorly received, and would love to go back and sort of do a remake of that. But I think at the same time that I'd want to do a remake of it, I'd want to distance myself from it, make it so people didn't realize that I was in any way involved with it. Because I think one of the reasons that game did so poorly, aside from the fact that it was bad in a lot of ways, but one of the reasons it did so poorly was because it broke people's expectations of what they wanted to see as a next product from me. So I went from Alice, which was a pretty full-featured, big-budget game, to Bad Day LA, which was a very low-budget game with a lot of limitations in the technology. But there was a story being told there about violence and politics and society and culture that I obviously wanted to tell, and I wanted to wrap it up in some humor, so people would find it enjoyable to play. But I think, yeah, it got tripped up on a lot of things, and then most of those things had to do with people's expectation about what I should be working on next. So to answer that question, I'd go back and redo and represent Bad Day LA, but at the same time, I'd hide my involvement from it, so it would have a fair chance of getting out into the world.
Sorry. I'm reading everyone is just in love with everything you're saying.
You're quite the hit with our fan base.
I'm glad to hear that.
So, is there like an estimated time when Alice Otherlands is going to be released?
Well, we're aiming for the end of this year. We do pretty frequent updates on the Kickstarter page. Maybe not frequent enough, but our timelines we've held to since the beginning. And the hope again is that by the end of this year, by the end of 2014, everything will be wrapped up in terms of production, and we'll be able to start manufacturing the physical goods and sending those out.
Now, for those that weren't part of the Kickstarter because they might not have known about it, is there any other way to pre-order it or put money into it, or do they just have to wait till it's finished?
Yeah, at this point, all of the avenues for financing or funding that project are closed. The content's getting built, so if people want to get involved, they'll simply have to wait until the content is finished. I mean, I'm sure as soon as the videos are released to the backers, then they'll also leak out. People will be able to find them online pretty easily. So I wouldn't worry too much if I hadn't if I hadn't backed.
So Taco Man asked, American, what's the answer to life, the universe, and everything?
I've been thinking about that for a long time, and I can't really give you a great answer. I wish I could. Except, again, going back to what I was talking about before, is to get out into the world and try to experience as much as possible. For me, I think, again, the older I get, the more I start to realize how valuable the time is that we have here. It's sort of, your life is the longest and the shortest period of time you will ever know. And every day, we've got to sort of go and try to find something to do with it that makes the living of it worthwhile. And so for me, that's sort of become going out and finding adventure, learning new things, interacting with new people. It's one of the reasons I left the States, and it's one of the reasons why I will eventually leave China as well. I don't sort of want to settle down. I want to keep moving and keep learning and keep having new adventures.
Okay, Cosmo wants to know, what are your thoughts about creepypasta?
I'm not even sure what creepypasta is.
It's basically like
Scary stories.
Fan fiction meets horror stories, basically.
I see. Unfortunately, I've never heard of creepypasta, so I'm sorry I can't answer that question. I'm a little bit, cut off from I guess your world out here. Obviously, we don't have the same sort of billboards up and the same TV shows on. I don't turn on the radio and hear the same top 10 that you do. So a lot of times I get people asking me what I think about something in popular culture, but it turns out that popular culture is yours, not the one that I'm exposed to here.
Well, we can tell you're not missing anything with the Billboard charts or anything.
Yeah, trust me, music here has pretty much hit a wall 10 years ago.
10 years ago?
Yeah.
Now, you did or at least Grimm had a comic book. How did it feel getting to work on comics, something other than doing games?
Yeah, we've had a couple of our properties. So Alice was turned into an art book, Grimm was turned into a comic book, Akinera was turned into a comic book and an art book. With a lot of those, we've worked with Dark Horse Comics to produce those things. And the experience has been great. I mean, I'm not the one writing or illustrating those books, though we do get to have a little bit of creative involvement with the story. But it's been great to see the characters come to life in other mediums, and then to see people get excited about collecting those mediums. Then it's always been great working with Dark Horse. They're really big supporters of sort of the art and story of the products that we make. And so yeah, it's been really great working with them.
So speaking of products, I have a request. Are you guys ever going to make a plushie of the cat from Alice? Because I know I'd love one.
Yeah, I mean, I think all kinds of merchandise from that franchise would do very, very well. The problem is, it goes back to who owns the rights. So EA owns the rights for the game stuff, and since that's what's out there and it's published, they also control the rights to the toys. That would mean plushies, posters, all kinds of stuff. If we ever get a film made, and I'm hoping we will, that the film rights include the ability to make merchandising that links to the film and promotes the film. So that means that producing a film could open up an avenue for us to also produce a series of physical goods to promote the film, and it's certainly something that I'm hoping we can do, because I mean, it's always been a great mystery to me why EA hasn't, for lack of a better word, sort of exploited the hell out of Alice, because people want the physical goods. They want the cat, they want Alice, they want the toys. And if you talk to Dark Horse, you talk to the toy makers who did the toys for Alice, they'll tell you those were best-selling products. But EA just doesn't. They just don't care about the physical goods market.
Well, it seems like with Alice, EA kind of tries to hide it for the most part, which is a real shame, because I know that's the game. I don't know if you were here before we officially started the interview, but I was talking about that was the first game like that I ever played, and I absolutely fell in love with it.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like
EA. EA views Alice as a failure. They've never lost money on Alice, so whatever they've put in terms of development and marketing costs, they've always earned that money back, and maybe a little bit beyond that. But they've never made what they would consider to be real money with Alice. So they just have no reason to be interested in it. The audience is not big enough. The audience is not spending enough money. So this goes back to the question of, first-person shooters and the saturation of these kinds of titles on the marketplace. Well, this is the audience voting with their wallet. People buy first-person shooter games in mass quantities, and can generate $1 billion in sales off of one game title. And then you look at something like Alice, and it barely scratches the surface of recouping the money they invested into it. It's not actually that surprising why EA won't invest in it.
It is a real shame. It's a shame that you can't get the rights back to it to show them that they're absolutely wrong, that it was a failure. 'Cause I think at least the second game, I remember reading a lot of people that had never played the first game didn't like it, but I think the second game was absolutely gorgeous and well done.
Now, is there a time frame that they have the rights for, that like after a certain time has passed you can go back and claim the full rights to that game, or do they have it forever and you'd have to buy it from them?
Yeah, it doesn't really work like that. I was an employee of EA when I made the game, therefore EA own the rights forever. And they would never sell the game rights. And the reason is that they would fear someone might go off and do something with those game rights that made people ask why they themselves, EA, didn't think to do that, right? They don't want to see someone else go and create a success. As I mentioned before, though, Alice is unusual in that the game rights and the film rights are separate, which is why we're able to pursue the Alice Otherlands animations and why I'm able to pursue making an Alice feature film here in China, because those film rights, the animation rights, all the linear media rights are things that I can control, and I don't have to ask EA for permission for how I use those things.
Some people are asking, what was your inspiration for the way that you write and draw? Did you have any inspirations for them, or was it just all of the way you do things?
I remember reading somewhere that people have a personal narrative style that gets established when they're quite young. So, before they're really hitting their teens, so when they're 12, 13 years old, and that narrative style is largely based on their experiences in childhood leading up to that point. And I would think that, at least for me, that's probably true, because my life, until my teens, was, I guess you could say, pretty dramatic. There was a lot of unusual stuff going on. There were very unusual family dynamics. And so, yeah, I think that you could say that's, or at least I could say, to me, it's clear that a lot of what I write about, why I write about it, has to do with the events of my life, especially when in my early childhood.
Apparently everyone in our chat is the Cheshire Cat. I'm sorry, I'm just reading everyone saying that. But it is getting late. So we want to thank you again for joining us. We hope you come around sometime.
It's
Sure,
been a
no
great
problem.
honor
Thank you
having
so much for having me on.
And you have been absolutely wonderful.
Well, I appreciate it. You two have also been wonderful.
So, guys, we're going to get back to what we do best, and we're going to let him get to work, because I'm sure he's got plenty of real work to do.
Have a good day.
Barbecue today.
Goodbye.
I'll talk to you all later.
We'll let him slip out. And that was American McGee. He is completely awesome. And I want to thank everyone who behaved in the chats. Very nice people. Very nice. And no, you are not all the Cheshire Cat. You stop that right now.